As laws change, there are questions that come up about how they'll be enforced. With Idaho's new abortion laws about to change, we talked to a prosecutor about how this may play out in an Idaho court. As war rages on in Ukraine, one of our Idaho senators visited the war-torn country. Today, we're hearing from Senator Jim Risch about his meeting with President Zelensky. Some native crickets are making a comeback. The bugs are making their annual return, and while they can't fly, they have the potential to make some trouble. We're going to show you these special little creatures. Later this summer, Idaho's abortion laws will change. The Supreme Court opinion in Dobbs v. Jackson overturns, the precedent of Roe v. Wade, returning the abortion law decision to individual states, like the state of Idaho. With that development, we expect abortion to be essentially outlawed in the Gem State beginning in August. It is important to note there are some exceptions for cases of rape, incest, and medical emergencies in Idaho. But the conversation is state to state right now. Abortion laws will look vastly different across the United States. Now, in Idaho, the legal community is now working to fully understand how the Idaho abortion law will actually operate in practice. Police departments are talking internally about how investigations into potential illegal abortion cases will go, and the public is waiting and watching to see how all of this will play out in reality. A big test here is seeing how an illegal abortion case will play out in the court system in Idaho. And there's a lot of unknowns right now, as well as plenty of gray area. There's also a conversation about county prosecutors, the elected officials that are tasked across Idaho with deciding if a legal case that is forwarded to their office will be pursued in an Idaho courtroom. Could this new law introduce dangerous partisanship to a county prosecutor's office now or in the future? Well, for expert insight on the topic and discussion around it, I spoke with Twin Falls prosecutor and president of the Idaho Prosecuting Attorney's Office Association, Grant Loebs. And we began talking about how difficult the new law will be for prosecutors to handle. Yes, this is an emotional topic, and there are still many questions to be answered. But Prosecutor Loebs says this is the job, to prosecute the laws that the state legislature passes.
Like anything else, we just read the law that the legislature passed. We try to interpret it properly. We try to put it into effect in a rational, legal way as foreseen by the legislators who passed it. And, we'll just wait and see how it actually plays out. I don't know how many cases we'll have, that the police bring to us that contend that this law has been violated. Your guess is as good as mine on that.
Do you get the feeling that the abortion law in Idaho will be less or more complicated than other things that you handle right now, or is it kind of too early to tell? As you touched on, no one knows how many cases like this will even be referred to prosecutors' offices.
Doctors or abortion providers have rules to follow under this statute. It's not an absolute prohibition. So I think the complexity will be in determining whether any of the exceptions exist and looking into the facts surrounding the particular case and determining whether one of the three major exceptions exists in a case. And that's usually just, looking at the evidence and obviously providing the defense attorney in a case with all of the information that we have and asking that defense attorney, as we do in every case, to come forward with anything that mitigates or changes, the report that we've gotten from law enforcement. So it's a long process, and I think it'll be a long process in these cases if they, in fact, come forward to us.
Prosecutors in Idaho are elected positions. I'm curious if you have any concerns or thoughts about the idea of partisan prosecutors who would run on the idea of, I'm going to prosecute all these abortion cases, or like you mentioned, you'd have a prosecutor that would say, I don't care if the law says I'm not going to prosecute those.
I would think that either point made by a prosecutor candidate is an illegitimate one. I think that your job is to enforce the law to the best of your ability. And, that doesn't mean there's no discretion in the enforcement of the law in a particular way, in a particular case. But I think to just blanket say, I am either going to be as harsh as possible, or I am either going to ignore the law entirely, I think that's an inappropriate position for a prosecutor to take. Obviously, if you have those positions as a human being, that will color how your office prosecutes the case and how it uses its discretion. But, we elect humans to these jobs. We don't elect robots. And, that's a position we will learn once the law starts to take effect and we start to see how it's handled. I think that the only appropriate position for a prosecutor to take is that they'll look at each case on its merits as it comes forward to them.
Specifically in Idaho, do you think it's necessary or important for the medical community and the legal community to have some type of a conversation about, where is the line or where is the gray area in terms of, I guess the phrase is to save the life of the mother? I know that there's a lot of intricacy there, and at the same time, are you and your colleagues expecting calls from doctors that are saying, I don't know if I should do this surgery or do this procedure or not? Could you give me legal advice here on the spot?
Well, we certainly can't do that. We can't give legal advice on the spot to somebody. And, we don't have a hotline, where my phone is red. And when the red phone rings, I answer a doctor and I tell him whether he can do an abortion or not. That any more than any other person who's thinking about doing anything else that could possibly be a crime. But I think it is appropriate, given the massive change that this is, to have a discussion between prosecutors and law enforcement and the medical community, because I think none of us wants to see cases where we are prosecuting doctors for doing something that doctors believe that they have to be doing. And so I think that a discussion is a good thing.
Another major topic Prosecutor Loebs and I talked about: how will law enforcement interact with the new law, in the sense of how will departments handle calls about illegal abortions? Do departments need new resources to handle cases? Will there even be cases to investigate? How do you investigate? Who can report something like this? There will be a lot of conversations between prosecutors' offices, local police, and the medical community. Of note, though, Boise police put out some info on this topic while addressing the rallies and protests at the Capitol over this weekend. And in a series of tweets, BPD writes in part, quote, "The Boise Police Department understands the community's interest on the impacts of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization, its impacts of Roe v. Wade and Idaho law." They add, "Pending legal review and input from Boise City Council, Boise Police are not planning on providing additional resources to investigate reports regarding abortion. We understand that there are many strong feelings on this issue, and we will follow the direction of our legal team." There's a lot to follow here, and we will be keeping a close eye on it. On the global stage, Idaho Senator Jim Risch met with Ukrainian President Zelensky in Ukraine. Now, Risch is the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Risch was in Ukraine to talk about the ongoing Russian attack on the country that has gone on for weeks and months now. A short time ago, a few moments ago, I actually just spoke with Senator Risch about the trip and the state of things in Ukraine. He's still in Europe right now. I spoke to him while he was in Brussels. He says as the war rages on, the people of Ukraine are still energized to fight Russia. An aggressor that we've seen is not backing off their attacks. Risch described his sit down with Zelensky and the meaningful conversation that they shared.
Well, we met for about an hour and a half, and the conversation is pretty much what you'd expect when I meet with heads of state frequently. But obviously, this one was geared much more towards the war that they're in the middle of right now, and how it's progressing, the things that have happened so far to get us where we are, the issues obviously going forward, always the prognosis for how does this end, when does it end, and what does the end look like.
We watched as President Zelensky was an international sign of hope for many weeks and months. I'm curious, with news like today where there's a rocket attack on a mall with 1,000 people inside, what is the morale like right now? What is the energy like after weeks and months of this conflict?
They still got the energy. The morale is good. When I was there, we were between the two rocket attacks. The first one happened just a few hours before we got there. The Russians had launched over a dozen rockets. The Ukrainians got them all except 3. They hit a high-rise building, and there was one fatality and a handful of injuries as a result of that. Then, not long after we left, of course, this next one happened. They haven't been hit in Kyiv for some time. if you go down the streets in the main part of Kyiv, you don't see any damage or anything like that. And on Sunday, you wouldn't even know there was a war going on. People were pushing their children, and people were biking. There were cars all over the road. There was an amusement park that was open. People were there. The other parks were heavily populated. Restaurants were full. The sidewalk cafes were full. You wouldn't even know really that there was war going on. Now we went just north in the Irpin where the main fighting was, as they tried to break into Kyiv and didn't get it done. And that town's been about 70% destroyed. That one in Busha that's right next door, where you read about all the atrocities that happened. That's a whole different ballgame up there. And the airport, the defenders who actually defended that airport on the first wave on February 24th walked us through and walked us across the battlefield, showing us how they defended the airport. A lot of damage up there, obviously. I've been in war zones before. Something's going on here that is incredibly interesting to me, and that is they're rebuilding. While the war effort is going on, the bridges we took out of town to the north are all rebuilt from the Ukrainians themselves blew them up to stop the Russians from coming in, but they've gone in and rebuilt the bridges. Everywhere you look, there's cleanup going on. They're rebuilding buildings, and that's really neat. You can't come away not be impressed with the initiative of the Ukrainian people. And it's heartbreaking to see what's happened there, what the Russians have done to them.
Really interesting perspective there from Senator Risch on the ground in Ukraine. Again, he has now moved on to Brussels, but we are going to hear more from our interview with Senator Risch tonight on the KTVB News at 10. You can also read all about his trip and see pictures and videos from it right now at ktvb.com. Here on the 208, we try to answer as many of your questions as possible each week. So we want to take some time to answer a couple today that we did miss last week. So we'll start with this one from Debbie. Debbie writes, we are only days from state end fiscal year. How large of a surplus does Idaho have? Yes, we talk a lot about the surplus, and she's right. The state's fiscal year ends in 3 days on June 30th. So we reached out to Alex Adams, the administrator of the Idaho Department of Financial Management. He says that they update the revenue monthly, so the latest numbers they have are as of May. So these could change, know that. But right now, the number sits at about $1.3 billion in surplus. And Adams tells us that he believes it'll probably stay around that $1.3 billion mark at the close of the fiscal year. And that would be a record at the end of last year, the last fiscal year, I should say. Idaho sat with a surplus of about $809 million, which was also a record for the time. Earlier this year, Governor Little and the Idaho legislature approved a record $600 million in income tax relief, including $350 million in rebates, thanks to that surplus. Meaning, if you filed taxes in Idaho in both 2020 and 2021, you should have gotten a check, either $75 or 12% of what you paid in taxes, whichever is greatest. We understand some people are still getting those checks, so keep your eye on the mail. Well, Governor Little and the legislature also approved $250 million in permanent income tax reductions going forward, and the governor says there could be more on the way. And Carolyn asks, another question as we move on. My apologies here. We're going to move on here. Carolyn says, since June is Pride Month in the United States, why is Boise's Pride celebration in September? So you're right, Carolyn. Pride Month is typically celebrated around the country in the month of June, but the whole pandemic complicated things a bit for Boise's organizers. So last year, Boise's Pride decided to move their festival to September because of COVID restrictions that were in place at the time. And this year, they decided to keep it in September. But why? Well, we asked Joseph Kibbe, who's on the board of directors at Boise Pride, and he told us that after last year's festival, they collected feedback from the public and a number of stakeholders and decided to hold it in September again this year because it was so popular. But again, there are still things happening through the rest of the month to commemorate Pride. The main festival, though, will be this September 9th through 11th. Turns out other drivers aren't the only thing you have to watch out for on your summer commute. A type of bug locally can make reaching your destination a little more complicated. But we don't mind if you bug us. See what we did there? We want to know what you think about today's show or anything going on in your neck of the woods. You can text us your comments or questions anytime. 208 888-321-5614. Be sure to include your name and hashtag the 208. We're going to answer some of your questions live at the end of the show. A summertime sight you might be familiar with here in southwest Idaho. It's Mormon crickets. And any Idahoan who's lived in the area may feel their skin start to crawl. I know producer Sophia likely is. Now, these flightless insects can grow up to 3 inches in length and can migrate up to a mile a day. And you don't know what we're talking about. Let me show you. Now, people are already seeing these Mormon crickets emerge this year. This is from Greg Harwood. He shared the picture on Facebook. He said he was up in the Owyhees and he saw the Mormon crickets out in full force. Now, Many says that she was in that area on Thursday and spotted a similar sight, and she drove over 224 miles of Mormon crickets, she says. However, they're not really crickets, and Mormon crickets are actually katydids, or grasshoppers. Their name originates from the Mormon settlers of the mid-1800s, and according to records, when settlers arrived and began planting, a plague of crickets nearly destroyed their crops. The settlers prayed for a miracle, which they found in the form of a swarm of seagulls that came by and ate the insects. The story suggests that this act led Utah to name the California seagull as its state bird. And Mormon crickets can also cause serious agriculture complications and, in some cases, traffic hazards. So that's what happened in the May of 2002. Traffic hazards. The crickets blanketed sections of Idaho Highway 55, and the Idaho Transportation Department advised drivers to treat the drive just like they would in icy conditions. Can you imagine that many crickets? We're going to show you. And John Miller takes us back in today's 208 Redial.
You know it's bad when they have to put up a road sign.
Yeah, actually I saw that down there and said slick road ahead. Crickets. I'm going, okay.
Of course, where most of us would just see bugs.
I see bait. I see free bait. He'll stand still. Oh, missed him.
Bob Lambro, a predator in his own right.
Yeah, I hope to fill this bottle.
Turns out Bob really wouldn't have a problem, because just up the road, that sound you're hearing? That ain't popcorn. I can say one thing's for sure, Bob. You're gonna need a bigger bottle.
I am gonna need a bigger bottle.
Oh yeah, you got a dozen at a time.
Yeah, I don't, they just come to me now.
The mass of Mormon crickets and other wingless longhorn grasshoppers running amok on this runaway truck ramp. Individually, no match for a Dodge pickup, but all together, one wiggly brown wave. Oh man, here they come.
Yeah, if you could herd them this way. Why I didn't bring a net, I'll never know.
Oh man.
This is fodder for Stephen King.
Or anyone else who pulls over and recalls stories of past infestations.
They were so thick on the road that they had to chain up to come up the other side of the hill.
And the seagulls were actually chasing them down and eating them. And the seagulls were so full they couldn't fly. We had to slam on the brakes not to hit the seagulls.
Of course, no one's slamming on the brakes for these guys. And for Bob,
That's 20 fluid ounces of bug.
so beware of the crickets on the roadway. And watch where you step. Oh! Oh!
Quit crunching them, John. You're killing my bait.
John Miller, Idaho's News Channel 7.
I was waiting for the steel drums to play. Hot, 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 as we have seen a high of 103 today, our first triple-digit day of the season, but phew, made it through the worst of it. We've fallen back to 102, so it is cooling off just a touch. 98 in Mountain Home, 80s in our mountain valleys. It's hot again tomorrow, not quite as hot as today, but still getting into the upper 90s, and it warms up rather quickly. Even a couple of spots that could hit 100 degrees tomorrow, but I don't think Boise will quite make it there. Here's a look at the 7-day forecast. Dry conditions, lots of sunshine, closer to seasonal averages for Wednesday with a bit of a breeze that kicks on tomorrow evening. And then looking ahead to the 4th of July, a forecast we're keeping a close eye on, but it looks like it's a hot weekend to start and cooling back off to more seasonable temperatures for the holiday. You can keep a close eye on the forecast too at ktvb.com.
You wanted it, you got it. The summer temperatures are here. And in case you missed it, some very cute, very short, four-legged friends got together over the weekend to enjoy this great weather. It was the 3rd annual Boise Corgi Fest, and the event included a corgi parade, a corgi derby, a costume contest, and a lot of different vendors. I hope Calliope was there. Look at that. Are they going to race? Do we get a clip of them racing here? I don't know how long this... There goes! Oh, that one won by a mile. Thanks for joining us on your Monday. We got some comments to get here to end the show. Reed writes in, will the abortion cases be jury trials? The Idaho abortion law that is expected to go into effect in August is criminal abortion. So long story short, yes, this would be just like any other criminal trial, which in the end of it could end in a jury trial if no deal or nothing like that is reached. So that answers that. This person says they were so bad that year that they were eating the siding off homes on Horseshoe Bend Hill. Yeah, we're talking about those crickets that we showed you. If you catch the crickets in your neighborhood, send us a picture or video. We always love to see those from a distance. I don't want to see them up close. Jennifer says, I miss John Miller. I grew up watching him. Hashtag the 208. I got to tell you, John Miller, he's got to be one of the all-time great Channel 7 legends. We love watching his stories and exploring Idaho. This person has a question about funds to repair the road. Long story short, you could invest the surplus in things like the road. We'll see if they do. See you tomorrow on Tuesday.